So I had a good example over the past several weeks. I think I may have mentioned I've been fighting a family of wasps that found a home in our shutters right outside our front door. And one came back today, and it's like home, and I feel so terrible. It's like this is where I am, this is where I need to be, but it smells bad now because that guy spraying that it's a mixture of peppermint and cinnamon spray and water that I spray, and they don't like the smell. So, but I thought how similar I am, because particularly the verse that we got into last time, verses 11 and 12, it gets into how that ignorance, the innate ignorance that we've been courting since beginningless time, apparently. I think of it a little bit like glue. It's kind of sticky because of out of that sense of me comes desire, right? And there's a desire to define ourselves. And last time we got into how that happens with particulars, little instances of definition. And we're going to go into that a little bit more as we finish the commentary on verse 12. But in a way, that that projection of self-nature that we have in terms of our aggregates, our mind, the features of ourselves, it can fix to anything, just like the wasp has fixed onto the shutters. Kind of, this is where I am, this is mine, this is me, right? And they fixed onto their bodies, obviously. So we're all like that. I heard a description by the psychiatrist about the Bardo. A friend had asked me about a YouTube on the Bardo, so I found that one. It's interesting if you want to watch it. It's only like 7 minutes long or something. But he compares the Bardo in between lives to our minds being like a feather in the wind, because there's really nothing to grasp to. so it's a very fluid state, and it's really the winds of karma that are taking it wherever they take it until we grasp on something to define ourselves. And then once we do that, then there's more of a basis for ascribing a sense of self. But until we completely purify that tendency of self-grasping, we'll continue to be like a feather in the wind of karma and cyclic existence, drifting from one bad experience to another until we can free ourselves. And so this is really the medicine of all the teachings of the Buddha. The stuff we're going over is the intense medicine for what ails us. So I'll start with the mandala, then we'll go back into verse 12 a little bit. Sashi Buki Juji Medata Rirali Jin De Gemba Dia Sangye Jindu Meda Uwagi Dogu Nanda Jinga Jubajo Iram Guru Rana Mandala Gamne Yatayami. Sangye Judan Zogi Jonam La Jaju Badu Dani Kazuji Dagi Juju Gibis Nangi Dola Badges Sangye Dubasho. Sangye Judan Zogi Jonam La Jaju Badu Dani Kazuji Dagi Juju Gibis Nangi Dola Badges Sangye Dubasho. Sangye Judan Zogi Jonam La Jaju Badu Dani Gazuji Dagi Juji Gibes Nangi Dola Benji Sangye Duba Sho. Okay, so as I said, we left off on verse 12. Verse 11 and 12 go together. I'll just read them in English and then I'll show the Tibetan again. that is immediate nirvana. In other words, when you see the emptiness of self nature, of self and other things, that's immediate nirvana. That very thing is attaining the goal for as long as we're focused on it, right? If after that insight into the truth, one discovers any particular here, imagining any sort of creation in anything, however subtle, such an unwise individual does not see the meaning of conditioned arisal. So that's where grasping at particulars becomes a huge obstacle. In the Tibetan, let me find it. It's over second verse from the top on the right-hand side. Ngumpo, um, Ngumpo is a entity. Any produced thing is a ngumpo. So anything that's produced by causes and conditions or that can affect something else is a ngumpo. So that's pretty much, we're a ngumpo. And all our aggregates are ngumpo. Um, to those entities, draw long, even if they're very subtle, gongi by one, kewa nam dakpa, arisal, nam dakpa is to impute a self-existent arisal. So let's take a sprout. Somebody who sees a sprout and imputes that the cause of it is a seed, but in their mind they think that the seed has some self-nature to it. And that's what's being talked about here. Somebody who does that. Nampa Mike, that's completely unskillful by that person. Genlejua, something that arises conditionally, dun matong. They don't see the meaning of that. They don't see the mind of conditioned existence. For that seed to produce a sprout, it cannot have self-nature because something with self-nature is unchanging and unable to produce an effect. And so it's really, it leads to an absurdity. So we got into this a little bit, and in a way, the group that Nagarjuna is aiming at now is the Satantric school um, of, I think they're kind of, maybe Kaya knows. Kaya, how are they usually labeled in English? Traditionalists, or how are they labeled? The Satantras? That's okay.
I don't know.
Okay. But anyway, it's one of the realist schools, the Vaibhashika and then the Satantra school. But here, um, the let me see if Art gives a name for them. Uh, okay. So last time we talked about how that can be applied to our five skandhas and thinking that there's some essence to the five skandhas. And the realist schools do think that. They think that for a cause to come out, to give a result, there must be some particular um, aspect of that cause that you can find under examination. And the Madhyamaka says no. No, if there were, it couldn't produce its effect. When a cause occurs, let's say the seed, when the sprout comes out, there's no seed, right? The seed is not is disappeared once it produces the sprout. And to do that, it means that the seed never really had any inherent existence to it, right? And so that's what's being argued here. So this goes a little bit deeper, and the reason I'm coming back to this, we went into it last time, but the reason that I'm coming back to it is that there's another level of this discussion that's mentioned in the commentary. So this grasping at particulars in the Vipachika school system, the realist, where they fall into this dilemma that's called unskillful here is when they look at particulate matter. We just were talking about quantum mechanics and physics, right? Which is burst apart the idea that you can find a smallest particle and that it exists on its own. The Vaibhashikas got trapped in this idea that if you just broke down the physical properties of something, eventually you would arrive at its smallest part. In Tibetan, that's called dul, it's sometimes translated as atoms, right? You get a smallest part. The Madhyamaka didn't accept that. They said, well, where did that come from? How do that can be divided down? You have to say there's a north side of it, a south side of it, an east side, west side of whatever that is. And certainly that point of view has been borne out by modern physics. So the Madhyamakas were correct and the Vaipachikas were mistaken. So holding on to that sense of a self nature in a smallest particle is what's being talked about in this verse, right? That's unskillful because once you fixate on that, you're trapped. You're holding on to a self nature, and that traps you in cyclic existence. So, also at a little more subtle level, there's a debate over the Four Noble Truths. A lot of the realist schools, and this will happen if you ever try to recite the Heart Sutra at a congregation of Buddhists from different traditions, you'll get a lot of different reactions about it. Some schools would take that as falling into where it says no suffering, no cause of suffering, no end to suffering, no path. Many schools hear that. They think that the Heart Sutra is trying to say that the Four Noble Truths don't exist. That's where it falls into nihilistic point of view, right? And so this is being commented on this verse in verse 12. And Gimmick and Rinpoche went into it a little bit more depth. Some of the lower schools say, we have the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, and then the path of seeing. That's what Stevie was referring to, waiting for a big bang effect when you see the path of seeing, right? And apparently there is when you really are able to see it within calm abiding. Apparently it does have a earth-shaking effect. But the realist schools hold, particularly the Satantra school, that there are 16 moments of that direct insight into emptiness. And that each of those 16 moments one realize one of the four aspects of each of the Four Noble Truths, making a total of 16 moments of realization. And so Madhyamaka is saying, no, that's unskillful. That would be saying that each of the four aspects of each of the Four Noble Truths has some identifiable nature to it from its own side, which is absurd. Right? Some schools, well, anyway, those four divisions of the Four Noble Truths, one's called Jusei, which means forbearance of Dharma. That's let's take the truth of suffering, where you're getting used to the idea that conditioned nature is suffering, or cyclic existence is suffering. Then there's the next moment, Jusei, in the path of seeing, where you realize that directly, seeing that truth of that directly. And then the next moment is called Jechu, which is post forbearance of Dharma, whereas you come out of that direct realization, there's a realization that this is true. This is true. Cyclic existence is suffering. And then Jechu is a post realization of that aspect of the Dharma, right? So those are four moments within each of the four truths where you realize those things. There are other ways to divide it into 16, but this is one way. So, as I said, some schools think that the first 15 of those 16 moments occur in the direct seeing of emptiness, and then the 16th moment starts the path of meditation. However, this is being called unskillful in this point, because when you're in that direct experience of emptiness, no relative phenomena appear to the mind. This is the Madhyamaka point of view. Implicit in that are the 16 realizations of the Four Truths. But during the direct experience of emptiness, all relative phenomena disappear. Because at an ultimate level, there's no inherent nature to any of the Four Truths. Right? Just like that seed cannot produce a sprout unless it lacks self-nature, so too, suffering, no self-existent suffering is produced by the true causes of suffering, which from their side lack any true nature. The cessation of suffering has no self-nature to it, and nor does the path that produces it. So nowhere within the 16 truths or 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths can you find any iota of self-nature. That's the Madhyamaka argument. So by now you can all hear that, I hope, and not fall into nihilism, thinking that that's saying that they don't exist. So the Madhyamaka point of view, you'll see there's 16 emptinesses of the Four Noble Truths, the emptiness of the aggregates, the emptiness of self. So all these different types of emptiness, right? Where do those get their names? They get their names from the relative aspect of phenomena. There's this thing we label Wilson, right? And then Wilson has his emptiness, right? It's a name that was applied by my parents on a young baby that was born from the substance of my parents, right? With a mental continuum that came from who knows where, right? And then it ate a lot of food, too much food. And now it can be known as Wilson just by that label, right? But from its side, it has no real nature to it. When this thing labeled Wilson dies, the body will go back into the four elements. There'll be no trace of it. The feelings that being labeled Wilson felt during his life will no longer be present. There will be no conceptualizations there, no um, volitional activities, no awareness. So where's Wilson? He's gone, right? Never was there inherently to begin with. There was no nature to it. A subtle continuum continues, but that most subtle continuum of mind then takes on the aspect of the karma that the clinging to self provokes as it goes forward and becomes something else that gets labeled some other label, depending on whether it's perceived, right? So, in its ultimate nature, there's no self there in any aspect of it. Yet it appears and it functions. It's an entity, right? So, the Madhyamakas call that instance when the mind goes one pointedly directly into experiencing emptiness, they call it rochik. It becomes of one taste. So if you take any relative entity, any whoople, and you look into its ultimate nature and where it came from, you'll find that its cause have no self-nature, and neither does it. So it's all of one taste in terms of its ultimate nature. So even though that realization of truth consists of a single moment, those 16 moments, those 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths can be implied as all within that single moment. The emptiness of suffering, the emptiness of the cause of suffering, the emptiness of the cessation of suffering, and the emptiness of the paths to that sensation. So what's being refuted is not the Four Noble Truths, but any real characteristics to the Four Noble Truths, any inherent characteristics of the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so that's verse 12. It's a lot to chew, which takes us into verse 13. Let me go to the commentary, Chandakirti's commentary. In Chandakirti's commentary, he quotes a verse from the Mula Madhyamaka by Nagarjuna. Whatever is relatively existent, that is naturally at peace. Hence, both the being created and the creating itself are at peace, which is quoted by Chandrakirti to support verse 12, that there's no ultimate nature to the seed nor the result. And so Nagarjuna says further, nirvana lacks any distinction whatsoever from cyclic life. And cyclic life lacks any distinction whatsoever from samsara. The limit of nirvana is also the limit of cyclic life. Hence, between the two, one finds not even the subtlest distinction. So where is nirvana? It's here now. Where is samsara? It's here now. It depends on what we're carrying with us as we perceive what's happening to us in the present moment. So the next part of the commentary, verse 13, gets into the fault that some assert that therefore, since samsara can be ended, there must be a beginning to it. And so Nagarjuna gets into that topic with this verse. I'll go through the Tibetan first and then go back to the English. So Yunmong are the mental afflictions. Sepe is the termination of the mental afflictions. Gelong is a monk who has ended the afflictions. Gigelte means if a monk has ended the afflictions, or it's possible for a monk to end their afflictions. Poranandok, if samsara can be ended. Na, if. Chichir, why? Zolksangye Namgi, why haven't the completely enlightened Buddhas, De Somba Namishe, why haven't they taught about the beginning of samsara? So that's the next point of debate. It can be ended by ending the self-grasping from whence the afflictions come, and thus the afflictions. Then why didn't Buddha teach it had a beginning? Okay. So Buddha's point of view is that all conditioned phenomena um, all conditioned phenomena are afflicted. Um, those that relate to birth, let me pull up the wheel of life here for this. So when we talk about birth, the links on the outer links of the 12 links of dependent initiation, the nidanas, if we get to the third link, that's not ignorance, not karmic formation, not consciousness, but name and form. So this is a baby. We talked about Wilson, the infant Wilson, right? So as this person that's now labeled Wilson was forming in his mother's womb, there was the boat of that new body that my parents provided, right? And then the passengers were the continuum that was to become known as Wilson, with its feelings, its conceptual designations, its formational factors, and its awareness in that new container. Remember, the 5 aggregates can be compared to cooking a meal. The body's like the container, the feelings are like the food, the discriminating conceptualization designations are like the condiments, like the salt and pepper or whatever you're putting into the food to make it taste a certain way. The cook is like the formational heaps, the impulses that create karmic causation. And then the eater, the one who consumes it, is awareness, which is like an illusion. The 5 sensory consciousnesses as well as the mental consciousness. So that's here, name and form. So this is one of the links related to birth. The next one here are the sense faculties, which is like a house with empty windows. Those are our windows into the world, the sense faculties that are forming when we're a fetus. And then the 5th part of birth is when our awareness and our feelings start to interact with our sensory awareness. There's a coming together between the ayatanas, the sensory conscious faculties, as well as their objects, as well as the sensations as those come together. And then the sixth factor related to birth is this guy with an arrow in his eye feeling, ouch, that hurts, or or that tastes good. I want more. You ever see an infant, as you're trying to feed them, and they'll throw away the food they don't like the taste of, and then they'll grab the food that they like, right? So that starts from the very get-go, in terms of somebody who's still in the cycle of existence. All right, so there are links that are related. Those are the four links related primarily to birth. There are four links that are related primarily to the afflictions, starting with the second link of karmic formation. If the afflictions aren't there, karma is not made, right? And so that's why the cause of samsara is afflictions and karma. So that's like the initial formation. Karmic formation is an afflicted formation. The next link that's related to afflictions is the seventh one. So after we start to feel pleasure, pain, and indifference, we start to feel, here's a guy taking a sip off a beer, saying, that doesn't taste bad. I want another one. I mentioned the infant who's been fed something kind of tasty and they want more. And one of the first words you'll hear infants say is more, more. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I found that to be often true, or something like that, when they have an initial sensation of pleasure, right? So that's an affliction because it's based on craving and desire. Then that grows into a habit, a long-term craving. And that's this eighth link with a monkey trying to get fruit from a tree, where we actually go after what we want. And you'll see that on the beltway or the highway every day as people scramble at breakneck speed to get what they need or what they want to survive, right? And then that eighth link, which is afflicted, leads to the ninth link, which is afflicted, which is becoming. When a habit becomes so developed that it starts to overtake our psyche, that begins the process of becoming a karma that will form what we become next when we die. When we die, it's either the most recent karma, the most powerful karma, or the most consistent karma that we've been cultivating through our craving and desire and wants, that overtakes the continuum and defines what we're going to become as we're thrown into our next life. So those are four afflicted links in this diagram. And then a third category is karma itself. I mentioned this goes back to this link. The second link is karma, right? And then the 10th link here is also karma, birth. When a cause develops to maturity and then it gives its result. I mentioned the seed and the sprout. So when the seed that was developed through these early links comes to fruition and we die, then that potent ripened karma gives way to what we become. So when this person called Wilson dies, whatever he's been cultivating in his actions and mind, whatever comes prominent, will shape what he's to become. And when he's reborn in whatever realm, whatever form, the cause that produced it will not be apparent, just the result, that future birth. So that's kind of how samsara spins. None of the causes have any um, self nature. But if you eliminate, and of course, if you're born, then you die. Um, the primal cause of ignorance here is kind of what keeps it all going. Actually, that should be one of the afflicted links. I, maybe I didn't write it down right. Oh, no, it is. I'm sorry. That's one of the afflicted links. I said karma was. That was a mistake. Ignorance is one of the afflicted links, the four afflicted links. So that's what produces all the mess. And that's what's being targeted by Nagarjuna's 60 verses. That's what we're trying to eliminate. So,
And I have a
yeah,
question about ignorance.
yeah,
So of course, when you're born into the world, um, unless you really remember a past life, you're going to be ignorant about the world.
yeah,
But in Buddhism, it isn't just that kind of ignorance. There also is the one like not willing to understand something or being aware of something or even doing the wrong thing when you kind of know that it isn't right. So aren't there levels of
oh
ignorance?
yeah.
Okay, just curious. All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, two of the levels that are really talked about in Buddhism, one is called learned ignorance, and those kundak, um, those are forms of ignorance that we get through what we learn during our life. Like, for instance, and that's one I think Sharon's mentioning, somebody who's been conditioned since they were young to see their group they belong to in a positive light and to denigrate groups that are seen as different. That's a learned form of ignorance. They were trained in it, right? Those kind of learned forms of ignorance get eliminated at the path of seeing. But what doesn't get eliminated is what's called the innate ignorance, um, which has been with us since beginningless time. So this gets very nicely. It's a good question, Sharon, because it gets us very nicely into this 13th verse that's asking the question. So if Buddha taught that samsara can end, why didn't Buddha teach a beginning to samsara? If the monk who exhausts his addictions completely, eliminates cyclic life, then why do the perfect Buddhas not teach the beginning of such cyclic life? So understanding these links gives you kind of a clue of where this answer is going. So in the lower schools, nirvana is seen as an annihilation of the five heaps, right? Um, and the idea that there would be nothing to go forward to produce the next life if you're able to eliminate the five heaps. That this is considered by Madhyamaka to be an errant view. And it falls into a nihilism as well as an eternalism kind of view. So according to Abhidharma and Madhyamaka, this is really interesting. I think I've heard things similar to this before, but not in this context. So the Madhyamikas postulate that there's a subtle aspect of the physical body and the mental skandhas that can develop into future lives. That becomes a cause for future lives. That subtle physical aspect is luminous in nature. It pervades our rough physical being. At death, it shrinks back into our subtle mental being, and serves as a cause for a future physical being. Has anybody heard that one before? Well, if you did, I'm repeating what you've already heard. But for me, that was I hadn't heard it in a sutra context that way. Um,
It almost follows the clear light practice. So what you do when you
mhm.
practice it, if that makes any, to me, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
well, it makes a lot of sense from the Vajrayana point of view. It's like how we practice. And it's interesting that even at a sutra level, there's that idea about what the basis for our physical form is. So in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, there are different, I mentioned before, there are different ways to meditate on emptiness and different numbers of emptinesses and so forth. And those are all defined in reference to the basis that's being analyzed. So in the instance of the emptiness without beginning or end, which that debate in the Prajnaparamita is used to talk about the beginningless nature of samsara. Also, in this verse 13, it what's being stated is that clearly we can end samsara. That's being stated clearly, right? That there is an end. But nirvana itself is the way to end it. But the same logic that how you can end samsara cannot apply to the beginning of samsara because you can't find a first cause. We can talk about how to break down the links in the cycle of existence, beginning with ignorance. If we get rid of that, we don't get the second link or the third, right? And so we can talk about how philosophically to end it. But what's being stated here is that we can't talk about how it begins because any first cause must have had some cause to produce it. So So if I take the example of the seed, right, before that produces a sprout, if I say, what's the beginning of the seed, what will you say? So what's the beginning of the seed that produced the sprout?
It would be the plant or the tree that dropped it.
And then if I ask, what was the start of that tree or
Well, the
plant?
seed, there we go.
The chicken egg, right? And so basically that's the answer to this verse, that you can't find a first cause to samsara. It would be absurd to assert, which takes us into the 14th verse. If you claim a beginning, definitely you're embracing an afflictive view. This is Nagarjuna's response. What beginning or end could there be to that which rises interdependently? Now go to the Tibetan for that verse. All right. Here it is at the bottom of the page on the right. Sompa is a beginning. Yeah means to exist a bit. A beginning exists. So if you look at most religions, there's an origin story, right? Some will say God decided that he was lonely or she was lonely and decided to create heaven and earth. But then, of course, somebody would say, well, what created God? If you're a Buddhist, where did that come from? But I think some stories from native cultures like Turtle Island, there was a turtle and then the world was put on the back of the turtle kind of thing. So none of them make much sense if you analyze them logically, right? And so really Buddhism is the only one religion I know that says there was no beginning. Even scientists now, there's the Big Bang theory that's been holding scientific interest for a long time. And that's broken down as scientists will say, well, what caused that? What came before that, right? I think that Western science got locked onto the Big Bang theory because it was coming out of the Christian myth theory of an original creation of heaven and earth. But anyway, 总百月呢, if you postulate a beginning to samsara, yaba yang, then also definitely our gyurpa, our gyurpa are viewpoints, extremist viewpoints in this case. Though, then definitely you're falling into extreme views, is what that's saying. Yongsu Zen, you're completely holding extreme views. So if you postulate a beginning, then you're going to also start imagining a self-existent end to samsara. So this continues over here on the left, the top of page 222. If you're doing that, Ten Qing Zhao Yunhua Gang, Ten Qing Zhao means, ten means a basis or that which depends on the dependent. Jingdaoer is a relationship to what the base is. Junhua means coming forth. So in the case of the sprout, its basis is the seed. And the sprout is that which came forth in dependence on the seed and the soil and the warmth and the heat and moisture, right? Gong, whatever is dependently arisen, Dela, to that. How could it have a beginning? Dela, Gundan, Damechi. How could it ever have a beginning? So that seed, we went through the logic. Where did it come from? It came from a tree or a bush. Where did that come? It came from a different seed. So that's the argument. So if we postulate a beginning to samsara, then what came before that was caused? If we say nothing came before the first cause, then we're asserting there's no cause to samsara. Many absurdities follow from that kind of logic. So Shariputra, one of Buddha's main disciples, easily realized emptiness and was very sharp. So hearing a single verse of Dharma, one of Buddha's first 5 disciples was able, just hearing that one verse of Dharma from the Buddha, one of the first 5 disciples, because of that causation, that produced the cause for him to become an arhat. And it was due, these kinds of realizations were due because of familiarity with Dharma in previous lives. For other people, realizing this can be very difficult, right? And so if we hadn't had the good fortune of meeting with an enlightened being or hearing valid teachings, we might encounter the Dharma and it's like so overwhelming. So that's not a bad thing. It just means maybe we haven't had the good fortune of hearing it before. But if this stuff seems very easy to you, then you can probably postulate that maybe in a previous life you may have been exposed to these ideas before. Some can realize emptiness even before they enter the path of accumulation. One of Atisha's teachers was named Amaraksita. He began as a realist. He was in one of these schools that Nagarjuna is debating against. But he got a direct view of emptiness due to the power of his virtue gained by developing loving kindness. So it was a positive karma of loving kindness that led to his realization. Things are beginningless. Anything that exists must have been preceded by its own unique causes. However, just as a seed can be destroyed and thus not produce an effect, samsara can also be destroyed and not produce another effect. That which does not exist by way of real essence does not exist. Right? And so this is a statement in the commentary to eliminate nihilism. As you think about all this stuff, if you start to feel like maybe it's saying nothing exists, then I'll repeat that phrase to you again. That which does not exist by way of a real essence does not exist. Did that filter in? It used a double negative. Because we're saying it has no real essence does not mean we're saying it doesn't exist. Therefore, it can be ended by extinguishing its causes because it's not an independent thing. The mind never undergoes extinction. So that's the heavy concept. This is very similar if any of you study Hinduism. In that school system, the concept of Atman, and it's very similar, the idea of Atman is very similar to the Christian idea of the immortal soul, that which goes forward and cannot be destroyed after life. So Buddhism doesn't hold that extreme, but it does hold that the mind cannot be destroyed. The continuum of mind cannot be destroyed. One moment of mind arises from the moment just before it, but the mind is not material. So even though the four elements or the five elements might destroy themselves, right, or everything that holds the container that holds the mind might be destroyed, the mind itself is not destroyed by those things. It's more subtle than matter. So let's say there's a nuclear war and all life is destroyed on Earth. Those continuums aren't destroyed by that. They go forward. Where? How? I don't know. But what's being asserted here is that the mind itself will not be destroyed by anything. So the nature of mind is that it changes due to the influence of positive or negative actions that we do. So it's completely at the mercy of karma. And I mentioned that with the analogy of like a feather in the wind. So the last half of this verse, 14. Tenjing Dewa Jungwa Kang Egunla Tamichi. So if you understand dependent origination correctly, you will not be swayed by errant views. Ngumpo entities exist dependently. Durche, they are dependent dharmas, right? So being subject to other conditions, how could it be said to come into being? All right, so this is an interesting conundrum. All right, so let's go back to the seed and the sprout. Since the sprout is a dependently originated thing from a seed that's a dependently originated thing, how can we really say there's a sprout there? Once the sprout comes, everything about it is dependent. Like, have you ever taken apart a leaf? And then as you take it into finer and finer parts, what's left? Where is the leaf? There's no real essential thing there. And I mentioned Wilson when he dies and the body decays and it goes back to the elements and all the memories and everything else get um, um, lost because of the different aggregates shutting down and only the most subtle mind wind goes forward. How could you say there's an essential Wilson there? You can't, because everything about the phenomena labeled Wilson is dependent. And that's true of all of us and all of dependent horizon things. So you're getting closer to the next verse, which is Nagarjuna's view of the world. This is verse 15. I'll go back to the English to make it a little more powerful for you. But this gets into how Nagarjuna sees the world. This is verse 15 on the upper right. How could something primordially created subsequently be eliminated, free from initial and terminal limits? Beings appear like illusions. So that sense of yuma, illusions, yua, is Maya, illusions. Um, this this word yua also refers to deceptive states of mind. The word beings here, I'll go to the Tibetan because this gets to be important in terms of the wording. This is over here on the left, the first main complete verse on the left. Gunje means previously arisen, that which is previously arisen. Jitana, in the following way, Jine, Laryang, Dorporgur. How then again, if it's not really arisen, can you say it's ended? How can you say it's finished, right? Ngun tong chi se dadawa, since its previous moments and later moments are free from the extremes of existence or non-existence. Roa means transmigrators, but it also means the whole world, everything in the world which arises, has the appearance of arising, staying, and passing away. Yuma, Shintanang, it's all like an illusion. It all appears like an illusion, illusory beings, illusory dilemmas, illusory actions. It's all, remember that childhood song? Row, row, row your boat. Life is like a dream. And so that's Nagarjuna's view of the dependent origination and passing away of phenomena. So the eternalist notion is that the world and phenomena ensues from conceiving real entities coming into being because no external conditions could impact such an entity, and therefore it would not be subject to change or impermanence. However, these appearances of permanence and self-nature are deceptive, like illusions. Yuma Shinto. This leads to the 16th verse. Gangse, this is the middle verse on the left. Gangse, when Yuma is those illusions, Jung Shewa are said to arise when they're like, for instance, when we look at a sprout coming up, oh, there's the sprout, right? And Nagarjuna's saying it's an illusion. So when it comes and we say, oh, it arose, Gangse, when Jigbar Jung Yamdu, when something dissolves, let's say we see a bug die, and then we see its body fall apart over weeks as it sits there. We say it died and it's passed. Yuma Shepa der Milom Milom means unconfused. Yuma means illusions. Shepa der, see them as illusions. Stay unconfused. When something's born, when something stays, when something passes, continue to see them as illusions, arising, staying, passing. Yuma Mishe, if you don't understand them as illusions, Yong Su Se, you'll be completely attached. So this is very profound for your practice. We've all gone through terrible losses by this time in our lives, right? What Nagarjuna is saying, that our part in that, the world, he says, is all like an illusion, things appearing, staying, going away by causes and conditions that are beyond our controls. Our part in it, in our own suffering, is when those illusions arise and we think of them as inherently existing without causes and conditions, and we become attached. This is mine, right? Like those poor wasps, as they're seeing the shutters at my house. This is my home, this is mine. And they get invested in that. And then this guy comes out with his peppermint spray and ruins it, right? It becomes a source of anguish and anger and attachment. So this takes us back to that image of the wheel of samsara. The third link here, where you have the monkey, just read what Jime Khenpo Rinpoche said, and then I'll come back to the picture. The links of desire, craving, becoming, prepare ignorance and karma for producing a future life. Therefore, our present life is the result of previous karma, and with it, we are producing karma for future lives. So the first two here, ignorance, and with that ignorance of how we really are, ignorance of cause and effect, we enter into action. Those two together produce what's called immature karma. Then with attachment, I mentioned that there's kind of like a glue to that ignorance because it produces attachment, me, mine, right? It kind of comes together and it's like glue. And so it perceives, it kind of starts to grasp too. And as that happens, then those three links become an immature karmic seed that's going to develop. And as we take birth and the remaining links here from birth in the womb with name and form to the sense powers developing to contact, feeling, desire, craving, becoming into the next life, birth, and then death. All of that initiates from these first two, ignorance and karma. Yes, that's the boogeyman that keeps us suffering life after life. So there's a example here of a magician. Um, I might be skipping ahead. But it's okay. Um, I might cover this again because I might be skipping a little bit ahead. But the example of the magician is, you've probably seen this. Have you ever seen the ancient, like in the Philippines and other countries like in India, one way that people would entertain each other before movies and TV and everything is a magician would put up a white sheet and then they would put a strong light behind the sheet. The audience would sit on the other side of the sheet. Then the magician would put together different things to make it look like a bird flying by, or a horse came in, or an elephant, and it really looks real. If you've ever seen it, it looks like there's something behind there that's like a bird or an elephant. And so for the magician, they're not fooled. They know very well there's not a horse behind the curtain or the screen, right? But people in the audience might be deceived. Similarly, somebody that sees dependent origination is unfooled. They don't see any real nature to any of the phenomena they encounter or their heaps or themselves. It's like a magician's illusion, all of it. So let's say the illusionist creates the figure of a handsome male or a delightful female, right? Then those in the audience might develop attachment or aversion, depending on their reactions to what's there, because they hold whatever that appearance is as having some real nature to it. But the magician does not, because they know ain't nothing really there. And so that's what's being referred to in this verse. When you have that view that all those phenomena are like illusions, it protects you from that kind of attachment and aversion that drives karmic formation. So this is the key to starting to get yourself out of cyclic existence a bit at a time. Any questions on that? We have about 5 minutes. Should I launch into another verse or is your brain full? Okay,
No,
I had, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go
No,
ahead.
go ahead.
You go ahead. Okay. All right.
Steve, you can go if you want. I'll have a question after yours.
Mine, I just had this thought about, before the seed, right? Just there is this vast and void nothingness. So if the law of karma that, you can't, you know, you can't get, you know, rabbits out of rocks or whatever, you know, that they're all the same. It makes perfect sense to me that this this nothingness, this emptiness exists. You know what I mean? Like out of emptiness comes emptiness in a way. If it applies to those. Anyways, I'm going to chew on this for a while. It just hit me. It just hit me when you were talking, I think back at 13 and the seed and the sprout that, well, if there is no beginning, before the beginning there was nothing, emptiness, then it makes only perfect sense that there is emptiness.
Well, put it this way. Let's go back to the beginningless time.
Right.
There's always been some kind of entities, right? Something being produced. Otherwise, if there was nothing whatsoever, just empty space, what could possibly arise?
Like I said, I'm going to chew on this for a while. You may be surprised. I might actually come up with something.
However, emptiness itself is empty, right?
Right. Right.
It has no inherent nature apart from that which it defines. So there's Wilson and Wilson's emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And so,
I saw a teaching where, when you know, take on a Buddha, when you that really what you are taking on is emptiness into yourself.
well, put it this way, our emptiness is no different than a Buddha's emptiness.
Right.
The Buddhas lack any inherent nature, just like we do. What they've got that we don't have is they realized it long ago and they've purified all their mental afflictions and obstacles to omniscience.
Understood, which is why you do whatever practices you choose to do.
Right.
That's the ultimate goal of the practice. But I just thought that really struck me when I heard that, like, oh, okay. It just made more sense with my practice.
Well, certainly the Buddhas all and Bodhisattvas try to wake us up to this. They try to instruct us so that we arrive at it. The question about the lower schools of the realists, like, well, why did Buddha teach the Four Truths if they're empty, right? And the answer to that is that that's a path. There's a path.
Well,
Buddha taught the Four Truths to motivate people who are not yet enlightened,
yes, you have to start somewhere.
right? To realize, hey, you're
Compared to the material world, you have to start somewhere, and that it's a good place to start. It's where I
right.
started. So, I had a question about seeing everything, as illusions. Probably because I don't know, I have some terrible misconception, or I don't know, a misnotion of some kind that, illusions sometimes have to do with, well, that's what schizophrenics do. So,
The difference between this and schizophrenia is that schizophrenics hold their appearances in their mind
to be true.
as if they're real,
Right.
right? And
Mhm.
this is going the opposite direction, that any appearance lacks any substantial nature, right? Thoughts, feelings, perceptions, phenomena, all of it is empty, ultimately, right? And so it helps us from painting illusions of something as if it's fixed and as if we can own it and as if we can solidify ourselves around it. Any attempt like that is futile,
Right.
right?
Yes, all right. Well, actually, that point of view was helpful. It's, I don't know, it probably came out of a psychology class. I just had some kind of association with it that was really incorrect. That's all.
Well, but thanks. By the way, these discussions I find really interesting. I think it makes it more real for all of us when we kind of grapple with it and talk about it like that. Okay, so here's the closing prayer. Sashi Bagi Joji Meta Rira Linjin Yende Gemba Dia Sangi Jindu Meta Wagi Odogu Nanda Jinga Jubajo Ilan Guru Rana Mandala Gamne Yatayami Gawadi Gawagon Sunamiye Zozo Chin Sunamiye Lechungwe Dabo Kunye Dobasho Yanju Sensu Rinpoche, Mage Banange Geje, Geba Nyamba Meba Yang, Gone Gondu Bewa Shu. Gari Ro Eko Shingante, Benda Dewa Malu Chuene, Genrezi Wan Densen Gyazo Yi, Shabesi De Badu Dengyo Chi. So this week is His Holiness' birthday. And so all the Tibetans been praying. I imagine you've all been praying that he stays long. But he came through the knee surgery okay. He seems like he's on the mend. And so anyway, that's always why we end with that last prayer. We need him to stay a long time. All right, you guys. Good to see everybody. And
Be
then
well,
we'll-
Wilson. Take care.
and
Thank
then
you.
I guess I'll
Thank
see you guys in a couple weeks.
Live long, keep teaching.